but I can hopefully explain a little bit more why it doesn't make sense. First, everything you say on the law is right. And, it's labyrinthine, but we've known that before. There's a reason for it. And by the way, this incredible contempt and disparagement from Pam Bondi, she just doesn't know the Constitution, because here Congress has acted, in addition to everything else, where you say, of course, they want to protect their own ability and not have the presidency do end runs around it. It is right in the Constitution that Congress shall determine the process for appointing inferior officers, undisputed. That's what a U.S. attorney is. But you think about this hapless AUSA, it's kind of back to the March 15th Abrego Garcia times, where they're just in there doing their own thing. And I think your analysis, Ben, is these first 2 points are spot on. Remember, it does fall to the court to decide who should be the U.S. attorney. It's not a political decision when the interim has run out until there's a confirmation. And it's not a political decision. They just want to put someone competent in. And the broad side.
We need to talk about what just happened in federal court, because a judge absolutely eviscerated the Trump Department of Justice in a way that exposes the complete lawlessness and incompetence of how this administration is operating. And this isn't some partisan attack or political disagreement. This is about basic constitutional law, about following the rules that govern how our justice system works, and about Trump appointees who are so desperate to prosecute Trump's enemies that they're willing to destroy the entire federal prosecution system in the process. Let me break down exactly what happened, because this is genuinely shocking. A federal judge, Judge Brinkema, basically asked the Trump DOJ, why the hell is Lindsay Halligan still calling herself the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia when we fired her? She's done. She's gone. She's no longer the United States Attorney, so get her name off the pleadings. Stop pretending she's the United States Attorney. And we want to understand why, after she was disqualified by a prior judge, Judge Curry, in the Comey case, she's still showing up in court records representing herself as this United States Attorney. By the way, I am trying to do my best to gather all the information I can for you and share it with you. Please leave your likes and comments, and I would be grateful if you subscribed. Let's continue. The judge directed this at an assistant United States attorney, basically a line prosecutor doing day-to-day work for the Eastern District of Virginia Federal Prosecutor's Office. And that prosecutor's response was stunning. They said, we're being forced to do it. Judge, we're being told by the Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel to keep her name on the documents. She's our boss, so we don't really have an option or say in this. Judge Brinkema's response was perfect. She said, don't you think that after all these rulings we've seen across the country, whether it's the Third Circuit Court of Appeals saying Alina Habba needs to go because she was disqualified, you're just going to have a fake pretend United States attorney who should never have been there in the first place? Don't you think that's going to taint all your other cases? Think about what the judge is pointing out. When you have someone who's been disqualified, who has no legal authority to hold the position they're claiming to hold, and they're putting their name on criminal prosecutions, every single one of those prosecutions is potentially compromised. Every defendant can challenge their indictment. Every case can be dismissed. The entire work of that office is jeopardized because Trump and his DOJ leadership are so desperate to keep their political loyalists in place that they're willing to destroy the office's ability to prosecute actual crimes. Now, in response to these judicial beatdowns, the Department of Justice released one of the weirdest official statements I've ever read. This came from Attorney General Pam Bondi and Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. Let me read you what they said. Certain district court and magistrate judges in the Eastern District of Virginia are engaging in an unconscionable campaign of bias and hostility against United States Attorney Lindsay Halligan and her line AUSAs. In other words, the judges are picking on us. The federal judges are going after us for no reason. The statement continues, Lindsay and our attorneys are simply doing their jobs, advocating for the Department of Justice's position while following guidance from the Office of Legal Counsel. They do not deserve to have their reputations questioned in court for ethically advocating on behalf of their client. This Department of Justice has no tolerance for undemocratic judicial activism. We will continue fighting for public safety in courtrooms across the country, and we will not be deterred by rogue judges who fail to live up to their obligations of impartiality because of their own political views. That statement is absolutely insane. Pam Bondi is calling federal judges who are enforcing the Constitution rogue judges engaged in undemocratic judicial activism. She's claiming that requiring the DOJ to follow the law about how United States attorneys are appointed is somehow bias and hostility. This is authoritarian rhetoric. This is what happens when an administration has such contempt for the rule of law that they attack judges for doing their jobs. Let me explain why Lindsay Halligan has no legal authority to be United States Attorney and why the judges are absolutely right to be furious about this. The Constitution says that officers like United States attorneys need to be appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. There's an accompanying statute that recognizes Senate confirmation can take time, so it allows the President to put someone in as an interim United States Attorney for 120 days. But you only get to do that once. That 120-day term can be extended by a vote of the district court judges, who are comprised of judges appointed by presidents from all political parties. If the term isn't extended, that person needs to go. And again, you only get one shot at this. Here's what Trump did in the Eastern District of Virginia. He picked a guy named Siebert, a Republican, a Trump supporter, someone the Senate was ready to confirm. But Trump didn't want Siebert confirmed because Siebert refused to prosecute James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James. Siebert looked at the evidence and said there's no case here. Prosecuting them would be frivolous. He told Trump he couldn't do it. So Trump used his one interim appointment, then forced Siebert out and put in Lindsay Halligan. You can't do that. The law says you get one interim appointment. Trump tried to get two. That's illegal. In New Jersey, the same thing happened with Alina Habba. She stayed longer than 120 days, which violates the statute. The district court judges didn't extend her term. They fired her. So the DOJ appointed the first assistant United States attorney as the new interim. Alina Habba then fired that person and said, well, I'm taking her job now, so I'm the interim because you appointed a new interim and I stole her position. The judges said, you can't do that. You had your chance. We didn't extend your term. And the Third Circuit rejected her completely. Now in Virginia, the district court judges from all political parties are furious. They're saying, get Lindsay Halligan out of here. She's a squatter. What the hell is she doing pretending to be the United States attorney? And this is on top of reporting from last week when judges were already fed up. Now they're outright furious because Halligan's name being on these court filings is creating multiple problems. First, the courts are being disrespected. Federal judges don't appreciate the executive branch just ignoring their rulings and the Constitution. Second, they're worried that all these other cases unrelated to the political prosecutions of Comey and Letitia James are now being tainted. Criminal defendants in legitimate cases now have avenues to appeal and get dismissals because the person prosecuting them had no legal authority to do so. Third, many of these judges have backgrounds with the DOJ or worked at the DOJ, and they're watching the fall of this once proud institution. It's an embarrassing humiliation and stain on an organization they respect. Harry Litman, former federal prosecutor and host of the Talking Feds podcast, broke this down perfectly. Everything about the law here is straightforward. The Constitution gives Congress the authority to determine the process for appointing inferior officers, which is what a U.S. attorney is. This isn't a political decision when the interim appointment has run out and there's no Senate confirmation yet. The courts just want someone competent in the position. And Bondi's statement that the courts and magistrates are insulting and engaging in bias can be summarized simply as, the law is against us, so we're going to attack the judges and call it political. Lindsay Halligan could be Mickey Mouse. She could be Benjamin Franklin. She's a pretend non-prosecutor who doesn't legitimately have the power of the United States to even supervise a case. The Third Circuit opinion about Habba called her a legal nullity. That's exactly what Halligan is. And every single case she's involved with, every indictment, is compromised. Defendants are going to come before judges like Leon Brinkema and say this wasn't a legitimate indictment because the person who brought it had no authority. And this isn't just affecting Trump's political prosecutions. The Eastern District of Virginia handles serious crimes. Espionage cases, fraud, drug trafficking. Sex trafficking. These are bread and butter public safety cases that protect communities. All of those prosecutions are now jeopardized because Trump insists on keeping a legal nullity as the supposed United States attorney. Defendants in those cases will challenge their indictments, and they'll have legitimate grounds to do so. The DOJ claims the Office of Legal Counsel has blessed Halligan's continued presence. That's not true. What actually happened is political officials at DOJ like Todd Blanche gave a command from the White House: keep calling her United States Attorney. We know Haba has resigned and Halligan has been disqualified, but you keep using her title anyway. The Office of Legal Counsel is supposedly looking into this, but the legal theory they're hoping OLC will bless is absolutely desperate. They're claiming that Judge Curry disqualified Halligan and said she's a legal nullity, but didn't explicitly say leave the office, so therefore she can stay. Think about that logic for half a second. A judge says you have no legal authority to hold this position, you're a nullity, you can't prosecute cases. But because the judge didn't include the specific words, please vacate the office, Trump's DOJ claims she can stay and continue overseeing indictments of serious criminals. It's contemptuous, it's desperate, and it's a freight train heading toward disaster. Even if OLC does issue some far-fetched opinion supporting this position, courts are not going to accept it. Every single indictment that comes out of the Eastern District of Virginia is now vulnerable to challenge. Defense attorneys are going to argue there's a problem with the indictment because the person who authorized it had no legal authority, and the courts are going to have to deal with this mess that Trump's DOJ created. What makes this even more absurd is that there's a legal way to make Lindsay Halligan the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. Trump could nominate her, and the Senate with its 53 Republicans could confirm her. But that's never going to happen because it's abundantly clear we have an incompetent, inexperienced person who should never be within a mile of a U.S. Attorney's office, much less sitting in the U.S. Attorney's chair. Halligan was never a federal prosecutor before. She never even interned for the office. She has zero relevant experience. She was put there purely so Donald Trump could prosecute James Comey and Letitia James. And she screwed it up spectacularly. She was in a grand jury all by herself and ended up with a fake second indictment that the grand jury didn't even review. She tried to pass it off as the actual indictment for Comey. We learned she didn't even know the proper legal instructions and provided false instructions to the grand jury. She put up a witness, an FBI agent, who wasn't allowed to testify because he'd been exposed to attorney-client privileged information. And we didn't even get to those substantive issues because Lindsay Halligan was disqualified from the outset for being illegally appointed. This isn't about partisan politics. This is about the United States Constitution and basic statutory law about how prosecutors are appointed. But Trump doesn't care. Bondi doesn't care. Blanche doesn't care. They want their political loyalist in that position regardless of the law, regardless of the Constitution, regardless of how many legitimate criminal prosecutions they destroy in the process. Harry made a perfect analogy. Imagine you're at a baseball game with your family and there's a streaker who runs through the field, someone who doesn't belong there. Maybe the first time it's mildly amusing, but then the streaker starts disrupting the game, takes the pitcher's ball, throws the bases on the ground, makes it impossible to actually play baseball. And all that person would have to do to avoid this chaos is just stay in the audience and watch the game. With Lindsay Halligan, after Judge Curry's order disqualifying her and saying she's unlawful in this position, all the Department of Justice would have to do is essentially nothing. Preserve the status quo that existed before her. Don't put her name on pleadings. Don't have her show up to the office where she doesn't belong. The office would have a first assistant who could run things until a proper appointment is made. It could function properly, handle cases without creating legal issues. But they insist on putting her name on all the filings. She refuses to leave the office where she doesn't belong, like the streaker in that example, and she's ruining the game. Except we're not dealing with baseball where the stakes are just who wins. We're dealing with whether a drug trafficker gets convicted, though Trump will probably pardon them anyway. We're dealing with espionage cases, fraud cases, Ponzi schemes, sex trafficking cases. And the Department of Justice is having a squatter attach her name to these prosecutions where she has no legal authority. The courts are saying stop it. Just take her name off the documents. Tell her to leave the office so we can handle business like adults. And Bondi and Blanche are responding by attacking the judges as rogue activists. The judges are asking, why are you behaving like this? How is this the Department of Justice? How did we get here? This experience of law, of constitutional governance, was never supposed to be partisan. Whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent, the Constitution says what it says. The rules about how officers are appointed exist for everyone, but under the Trump regime, they're taking a whack-a-mole approach to the law. They're destroying something that actually was the envy of the world. American lawyers and judges used to travel internationally to show how our system worked, to demonstrate the rule of law and judicial independence. Now our system looks like Russia, where courts serve the president and law is whatever the leader says it is. The solution here is obvious. Trump could nominate qualified people for these positions and get them confirmed by the Senate. That's the legal process. But he can't do that because the qualified people he initially selected refused to prosecute his political enemies based on frivolous charges. So instead, Trump is trying to install unqualified loyalists illegally. And when courts say you can't do that, his attorney general attacks the judges as biased and rogue. This is authoritarianism. This is what it looks like when an administration has such contempt for the rule of law that judicial enforcement of the Constitution is treated as a political attack. And it's destroying the Department of Justice in the process. Career prosecutors are watching this and wondering what happened to their institution. Judges are furious that their courts are being disrespected and legitimate prosecutions are being jeopardized. And defendants in serious criminal cases are getting new grounds for appeal because the person prosecuting them was never legally authorized to do so. The comparison to what happened with Alina Habba is instructive. Eventually, the DOJ understood they were totally interfering with public safety. They set Habba aside, gave her some bogus landing pad title to save face, but removed her from the position. They said they'll continue to fight the legal issue, and if the Supreme Court somehow rules the Third Circuit was wrong, they'll bring her back. But for now, they backed down because the legal case against them was so clear. They could do the same with Halligan. They could acknowledge that she was illegally appointed, remove her from the position, put in a proper interim, and move forward legally. But they're refusing to do that because this situation has become even more politically contentious. Halligan came in with zero experience specifically to get the scalps of political enemies. And she did it, or tried to do it, in apparently very improper ways that we may never fully learn about. But instead of following the law that's clearly emerging from multiple court rulings, Trump's DOJ is saying we're going to continue calling her United States attorney because Trump wants it. Law be damned. Public safety be damned. The poor prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia trying to do their jobs be damned. We don't care because Trump likes this former insurance lawyer turned beauty contestant turned illegal prosecutor. Screw public safety. There's really no other way to rationalize this entire misadventure. This matters beyond just Virginia and New Jersey. This is about whether we're going to have a justice system that operates under the Constitution and federal law, or whether we're going to have a system where the president can install whoever he wants in whatever position regardless of legal requirements, and when courts object, the Attorney General attacks them as partisan activists. Every American should be concerned about this regardless of their political views. Today it's Lindsay Halligan prosecuting James Comey and Letitia James. Tomorrow it could be someone illegally appointed to prosecute you or someone you care about. The rules about how prosecutors are appointed exist to protect everyone from arbitrary governmental power. When those rules are ignored and judges who enforce them are attacked, we're sliding into authoritarianism. The federal judges in Virginia and the Third Circuit are doing their jobs. They're enforcing the Constitution and federal statutes. They're protecting the integrity of the criminal justice system. And they deserve our support, not attacks from the Attorney General calling them rogue and biased. Pam Bondi's statement was one of the most outrageous things I've ever seen from a sitting Attorney General. Calling federal judges who enforce the law against your preferred outcome rogue activists is banana republic stuff. It's what authoritarians do when courts won't rubber stamp their illegal actions, and it should alarm everyone who cares about judicial independence and the rule of law. Stay focused on this story. Watch what happens with Lindsay Halligan. See if Trump's DOJ continues to defy court orders and constitutional requirements. Notice when the Attorney General attacks judges for doing their jobs, and demand that your representatives in Congress provide oversight and accountability. The Department of Justice is supposed to be independent and operate under the law. When it becomes a tool for the president to prosecute political enemies using illegally appointed prosecutors, we've lost something fundamental about American democracy. And the judges who are standing up and saying this is wrong, this violates the Constitution, this can't continue, those judges are heroes defending the rule of law against an administration that has nothing but contempt for it.